Philippine Coast Guard ay pinunduhan ng ating pamahalaan upang magkaroon ng dagdag na at least 56 ships in the next 5 years. By then, we may be considered as one of the strongest coast guards in Southeast Asia. Magiging legacy po yan ng ating Pangulo.
On a rough day in the West Philippine Sea, a Philippine government vessel can look very small. One boat, one crew, one mission. Then the pressure begins. Chinese Coast Guard ships appear on the horizon. Maritime militia vessels move into position. Radio warnings are exchanged. Water cannons come into play. What starts as a routine patrol quickly turns into a confrontation. This has become the reality of the West Philippine Sea, where maritime disputes are no longer fought only through diplomacy, but vessel by vessel, day after day. That is the real backdrop to the Philippine Coast Guard's plan to acquire at least 56 new vessels over the next 5 years. The Philippines faces an enormous challenge. More than 7,600 islands, a maritime domain covering roughly 2.2 million square kilometers, and growing pressure from Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels. Japan is funding additional large patrol ships, France is supplying dozens of fast patrol boats, and Manila is preparing for the largest Coast Guard expansion in its modern history. Because in today's South China Sea, presence is power, and the Philippines has decided it needs a lot more of it.
Unidentified foreign vessel of Sabina Shoal. This is Philippine Coast Guard. BRP MRRV 4409.
August 2024. The Philippine Coast Guard vessel BRP Teresa Magbanua had spent months holding its position near Sabina Shoal. Its crew was exhausted, supplies were running low, and Chinese vessels surrounded the area almost every day. Then came another confrontation. Chinese Coast Guard ships moved aggressively. Warnings were exchanged, and the pressure intensified. For many observers, it was just another incident in a long-running dispute. For Manila, it was a reminder of a much larger problem. The Philippines was trying to defend one of Asia's largest maritime domains with too few ships. That reality is why the Philippine Coast Guard is now preparing to acquire at least 56 new vessels over the next 5 years. Not because it wants a bigger fleet, but because it believes it needs one. The challenge is enormous. The Philippines has more than 7,600 islands, over 36,000 kilometers of coastline, and a maritime domain covering roughly 2.2 million square kilometers. Every day, it must monitor shipping lanes, fishing grounds, reefs, shoals, and remote islands spread across vast stretches of ocean. Meanwhile, pressure in the West Philippine Sea continues to grow. Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels maintain a constant presence in disputed waters, reinforcing a simple lesson. Presence matters. China understood this years ago, building a strategy around showing up every day and refusing to leave. Manila has now reached the same conclusion. If presence is power, then presence requires ships. Ships that can patrol, stay on station, protect fishermen, and represent the Philippine flag without escalating every encounter into a military crisis. That is why the number 56 matters. It is not just a procurement program. It is the result of years of lessons learned in the West Philippine Sea, where every standoff and every confrontation has pointed to the same answer. The Philippines needs more ships, more endurance, and more presence. When most people think about the struggle for the South China Sea, they imagine warships, submarines, and aircraft carriers. But that is not what is happening. The most important vessels in many of these confrontations are Coast Guard ships. Whether at Second Thomas Shoal, Scarborough Shoal, or Sabina Shoal, the encounters are usually between white ships, not gray ones. And that distinction matters. A warship signals military confrontation. A Coast Guard vessel signals law enforcement. It allows a country to apply pressure without crossing the line into open conflict. China understood this years ago and built its strategy around it. While much of the world focused on the rapid growth of the Chinese Navy, the China Coast Guard quietly became the largest Coast Guard service in the world. Its vessels patrol disputed waters, escort fishing fleets, block access to contested areas, and maintain a constant presence across the South China Sea. That strategy forced the Philippines to rethink its approach. Manila realized that the contest is not being won by the largest navy, but by the side that can maintain the strongest day-to-day presence. The side that arrives first, stays longest, and keeps showing up. As a result, the Philippine Coast Guard has become a frontline force, protecting fishermen, escorting missions, monitoring foreign vessels, and conducting sovereignty patrols across disputed waters. But presence requires numbers. One ship cannot be everywhere. That is why the planned acquisition of 56 vessels is so important. The goal is not to match China's Navy ship for ship. It is to build a fleet that can patrol more waters, respond to more incidents, and maintain a stronger Philippine presence at sea. Because in the South China Sea, influence often belongs not to the side that fires first, but to the side that refuses to leave.
Well, ano na ang estado ng West Philippine Sea? Ano na ang nagawa ng pamahalaan at saan tayo papunta? I'd like to start by laying the basic approach of the Coast Guard in the governance of the security situation over the West Philippine Sea.
Long before the Philippine Coast Guard announced plans for 56 new vessels, one ship had already become the symbol of the country's maritime struggle, the BRP Teresa Magbanua. For months, the vessel held its position near Sabina Shoal while larger and more numerous Chinese ships surrounded the area. Yet, it stayed. That is why Teresa Magbanua became a symbol. Not because it fired weapons or won a battle, but because it refused to leave. Every day it remained on station sent the same message: the Philippines was still there. As images of tense confrontations spread around the world, the ship became a powerful reminder that sovereignty is not defended by words alone, but by persistence under pressure. But one ship is not enough. No matter how capable it may be, it cannot patrol every reef, monitor every shoal, or respond to every incident. That reality explains why Japan has become a key partner in the Philippine Coast Guard's modernization effort. The Philippines is expected to receive 5 additional multi-role response vessels, giving the Coast Guard more ships capable of long deployments, law enforcement missions, search and rescue operations, and sovereignty patrols. The lesson of Teresa Magbanua is simple. In the South China Sea, strength is not measured only by firepower. It is measured by endurance and the ability to keep showing up. One ship became a symbol. The next 5 could turn that symbol into a strategy. And while these larger vessels will help hold the line, Manila is also preparing to acquire something equally important: smaller, faster ships designed to get there first. The BRP Teresa Magbanua taught the Philippines the value of endurance. Sometimes you need a ship that can stay on station for weeks and maintain a presence in contested waters. But maritime security presents another challenge. Trouble rarely arrives on schedule. A foreign vessel enters disputed waters. Fishermen report harassment. A distress call comes from a remote island. When that happens, speed becomes just as important as endurance. The first vessel to arrive gathers information, establishes presence, and often shapes the outcome. That is why the Philippine Coast Guard is investing not only in large offshore patrol vessels, but also in 40 fast patrol boats from France's Osha shipyard. These ships may attract less attention, but they could become some of the busiest vessels in the fleet. Think of the future Coast Guard as a team. The larger Japanese-backed vessels are built to stay at sea and hold the line, while the French patrol craft are built to respond quickly and reach trouble spots before situations escalate. For a country with more than 7,600 islands and vast stretches of ocean to patrol, That flexibility is essential. Together, these ships create a layered force where one provides endurance and the other provides speed. That is the real goal of modernization. The Philippines is not simply adding more ships, it is building a maritime security network capable of responding faster, covering more waters, and maintaining a stronger presence across its vast maritime domain. For years, the Philippines faced the same problem: too much sea and too few ships. Vast areas of coastline, fishing grounds, reefs, and disputed waters could not be watched all at once, creating gaps that could be exploited. That is why the planned acquisition of 56 vessels matters. It is not about the number itself, but about what it makes possible. Instead of concentrating a handful of ships around one crisis, the Coast Guard could maintain a presence across multiple regions at the same time. The Philippines becomes more visible, more responsive, and harder to ignore. And in maritime disputes, presence changes everything. But this expansion is about more than ships. The vessels will operate as part of a larger network that includes coastal radars, satellite surveillance, reconnaissance assets, and information sharing with allies. Together, they help reduce the blind spots that have existed for decades. China will still possess a larger Coast Guard and Navy, but that is not the point. The real goal is to make the Philippines harder to surprise, harder to intimidate, and better able to protect its waters. This fleet will prove its value not in a single dramatic confrontation, but in thousands of routine days at sea, protecting fishermen, responding to emergencies, and maintaining a constant Philippine presence where it matters most. If the first phase of the story was about surviving pressure, the next phase is about building staying power. By now, one question should be obvious. How can the Philippines launch one of the largest Coast Guard expansion programs in Southeast Asia? Ships are expensive to buy, maintain, and operate, and building a larger fleet requires trained crews, infrastructure, and long-term funding. The answer is that the Philippines is not doing it alone. Behind this modernization effort stands a growing network of partners that increasingly see the Philippines as a key frontline state in the Indo-Pacific. Japan has emerged as Manila's most important maritime partner, providing vessels, financing, training, and technical support. This is not simply an act of goodwill. Tokyo understands that stability in the South China Sea affects the security of East Asia, where major trade routes and energy supplies pass every day. A stronger Philippine Coast Guard therefore serves both Philippine and Japanese interests. At the same time, the United States has expanded intelligence sharing, joint exercises, and maritime cooperation, providing the kind of awareness and support that cannot always be seen, but often proves just as important as ships themselves.
Australian shift maybe a decade or two ago in saying that Australia's future is with Asia has really become a reality, and that's why the closeness between our countries, between Australia and the Philippines, is terribly important.
Australia has also increased maritime cooperation and defense engagement with Manila, while European countries are paying closer attention to the South China Sea than ever before. France, in particular, has become an important partner through both shipbuilding and broader Indo-Pacific cooperation. Together, these relationships create a powerful multiplier effect. A Philippine vessel operating alone is useful, but a vessel supported by satellite intelligence, radar networks, information sharing agreements, and allied cooperation becomes far more effective. That is the real story behind the fleet expansion. It is not happening in isolation, but within a larger security network taking shape across the Indo-Pacific. Yet there is one reality no partnership can change. Allies can help build ships, train crews, and improve awareness, but they cannot patrol Philippine waters every day. Ultimately, the responsibility still falls on the Philippines itself, and that means building the fleet is only the first step. Keeping it operational for years to come will be the real test. It is easy to get excited about new ships. Launch ceremonies make headlines. Procurement announcements make headlines. Fleet numbers make headlines. But ships sitting in a harbor do not protect a nation's waters. Operational ships do. And that is where the real challenge begins. Buying a fleet is one thing. Sustaining it is something entirely different. Every new vessel requires trained crews, fuel, maintenance, spare parts, upgraded infrastructure, and long-term funding. This is where many modernization programs around the world run into trouble. Governments buy ships, the vessels arrive, the cameras leave, and then reality begins. Can the fleet remain operational? Can enough personnel be recruited and retained? Can maintenance keep pace? Can funding remain consistent for decades? These questions matter because the Philippine Coast Guard is not adding a handful of vessels. It is planning to add at least 56. That is a transformation, and every transformation creates new demands. The challenge is even greater because the strategic environment is not standing still. While the Philippines expands its fleet, China continues expanding its own maritime presence through new Coast Guard vessels, regular patrols, and maritime militia operations.
Within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, you are directed to depart immediately and notify us of your intention.
The pressure that drove this modernization effort is not going away. That means the Philippine Coast Guard must do more than grow. It must remain ready. Presence cannot be created for a few months and then forgotten. It must be sustained year after year. That is why this story is ultimately not about shipbuilding. It is about endurance, national endurance, financial endurance, and operational endurance. If the Philippines succeeds, it could field a Coast Guard capable of maintaining a truly nationwide maritime presence for the first time in its modern history. But that is also the real test. Because the hardest part of building a fleet is not launching the ships. The hardest part is making sure they are still sailing 10 years later. The ships are coming, the partnerships are growing, and the strategy is taking shape. But the real examination begins the moment those ships enter service. At the beginning of this story, we saw a familiar image, a lone Philippine Coast Guard vessel surrounded by larger ships in the contested waters of the West Philippine Sea. For years, that image captured the challenge facing the Philippines, a nation with thousands of islands, vast maritime responsibilities, and too few ships to maintain a constant presence across its waters. The BRP Teresa Magbanua became a symbol not because it won a battle, but because it stayed. It showed that in the South China Sea, presence matters. The side that shows up matters. The side that stays matters. And now, the Philippines is responding to that lesson not with aircraft carriers or a naval arms race, but with a larger and more capable Coast Guard.